My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at a very particular point in your story. Do not rush past this. There is something shifting behind the silence that once confused you, something moving in a heart you thought had already chosen distance. For a long time, they believed your silence meant you had stopped caring. They told themselves that if you truly wanted them, you would have called, pleaded, reached back, or asked them to return. But something happened within them recently, something quiet yet powerful, and now they are beginning to understand the reason you never asked them to come back. And the truth did not make them angry. It made them emotional in a way they were not prepared for. You see, there was a part of them that expected you to chase after what had already walked away. They may never have admitted this openly, but deep inside, they imagined your love would eventually overpower your dignity. They thought there would come a night when loneliness would become too heavy and you would reach for them. They imagined a message appearing on their screen. They pictured your name. They wondered whether you would finally say the words they had been waiting to hear, "Come back." But those words never came. Days passed. Then more time passed. And each time your silence continued, they built another explanation around it. Maybe you were angry. Maybe you were stubborn. Maybe you had replaced them. Maybe the connection had meant more to them than it ever meant to you. They created stories because the real answer was much harder to face. The real answer was that you had loved them enough not to force them. That truth is what has begun to settle into their heart now. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that a person you thought had abandoned the connection was actually respecting a decision you made. They are beginning to see that your silence was not empty. It was disciplined. It was painful. It was filled with words you chose not to send. There were moments when you could have reached out, moments when one emotional message might have changed the direction of everything, yet something within you kept saying that love should not need to beg for permission to be chosen. You did not remain silent because you had nothing to say. You remained silent because you had already said enough through the way you loved. And this is where their understanding became more emotional than they expected. They started remembering things differently. Moments they once dismissed are returning with new meaning. The patience you showed when they were uncertain. The way you tried to understand them without making everything about your own pain. The times you allowed them space even when that space frightened you. The conversations where you softened your voice instead of trying to win. The occasions when you stayed calm while something inside you was breaking. At the time, they may have mistaken your emotional control for weakness. Now they are beginning to understand that it was strength. And once that realization entered their mind, they could not remove it. Because suddenly another question appeared. If you never cared, why did you handle their departure with so much grace? That question disturbed the story they had been telling themselves. They began to recognize that people who feel nothing usually do not need to gather themselves piece by piece after someone leaves. People who feel nothing do not spend nights learning how to release what they still love. People who feel nothing do not choose silence because they are afraid that speaking would turn affection into pressure. Your absence did not come from indifference. It came from a decision not to stand in front of someone who was asking for distance and demand that they stay. My child, they are only now understanding what that cost you. There were parts of your experience they never saw. They did not see the moments when you nearly broke your own silence. They did not see how many messages were formed in your mind and never sent. They did not see the conversations you rehearsed alone. They did not see you wondering whether dignity was worth losing someone you cared for so deeply. They did not know that sometimes the hardest thing you did was nothing at all. No call. No dramatic appearance. No emotional confrontation. Just quiet acceptance of a choice that hurt you. And heaven saw what they could not. This is why your silence was never wasted. There was growth inside it. There was a lesson forming in the space where an old version of you might once have chased for reassurance. You were learning that love cannot be proven by how much pain you are willing to tolerate. You were learning that your worth does not become greater when another person finally recognizes it. You were learning the difference between loving someone and trying to convince them to love you correctly. Those lessons were not easy. They arrived through unanswered questions and unfinished emotions. Yet something beautiful began happening. You stopped measuring love only by whether someone stayed. You began measuring it by whether you could remain true to yourself even when they did not. And strangely, that is what they are noticing now. Your strength became visible only after you stopped trying to make them see it. Something within their life has recently caused them to revisit the past. It may have been a conversation, a lonely evening, a song, a memory, or even seeing another relationship unfold in front of them. Perhaps they watched someone chase a person who had already chosen to leave, and suddenly they thought of you. Perhaps someone spoke about what genuine love looks like when it refuses to manipulate. Perhaps they encountered a situation that mirrored what they once did to you. Whatever the trigger was, it opened a door they had kept closed. And behind that door was your memory. Not the version of you they once created to make the separation easier. The real you. The one who cared. The one who wanted answers. The one who may have wished they would turn around without needing to be asked. That last realization struck them differently. They finally understood that there is a profound difference between wanting someone back and asking them to come back. You may have wanted them more than they ever knew. Yet you also wanted to be chosen freely. You wanted their return, if it ever came, to be born from clarity rather than guilt. You did not want to become the reason they stayed somewhere their heart was unsure about. And that is something they did not appreciate at the time. Now they do. It has left them wondering how many times you quietly protected both of you from a reunion that would have happened too early. Think about that for a moment. If you had asked them to return during the height of their confusion, what would truly have happened? They might have come back temporarily. They might have responded to your pain. They might have returned because they felt guilty, lonely, nostalgic, or afraid of losing access to you. But would the deeper issues have changed? Would they have understood your value? Would they have understood themselves? Perhaps not. Sometimes separation reveals what constant closeness keeps hidden. Distance has a strange way of removing distractions. When someone is always present, it can be easy to assume they always will be. Their patience becomes expected. Their kindness becomes ordinary. Their emotional availability becomes something you believe you can return to whenever you wish. But when that person finally steps back without anger, without revenge, without begging, their absence begins speaking in a language presence never could. That is what happened here. Your absence started telling the truth. At first, they fought against it. They may have distracted themselves. They may have stayed busy. They may have convinced themselves they were moving forward perfectly well. They may even have acted happier than they felt. But there are certain connections the mind cannot completely erase just because the ego has decided they should no longer matter. And your memory kept returning in unexpected places. Not always dramatically. Sometimes as a small detail. The way you listened. The way you remembered things no one else remembered. The way you could sense when something was wrong before they explained it. The way you saw parts of them they tried to hide. They started noticing the absence of those things. And here is where something deeper happened. They began comparing. Not necessarily comparing people in a shallow way, but comparing feelings. Comparing emotional safety. Comparing conversations. Comparing the way they felt understood. Comparing the quiet comfort they experienced with you to interactions that looked good on the surface but did not reach the same depth. And each comparison created another uncomfortable realization. What they walked away from was not as easy to replace as they assumed. Yet even this was not the truth that broke through their defenses. The most emotional realization came when they understood that you could have made their departure harder, but you chose not to. You could have used every memory against them. You could have reminded them of promises. You could have demanded explanations over and over. You could have made them responsible for fixing every piece of your pain. You could have tried to pull them back through guilt. But eventually, you released your grip. Not because your heart became empty. Because you understood something they are only beginning to understand now. If someone must be forced to stay, their presence will never feel like peace. That thought has stayed with them. They may be asking themselves now, why did I expect them to fight harder for me when I was the one choosing distance? That question is changing their perspective. Because for a long time, they interpreted love through pursuit. They thought being chased proved importance. They thought if you remained quiet, perhaps they had never mattered enough. But now they are seeing something more mature. Sometimes love is loud when it fights. Sometimes love is even louder when it respects a boundary it never wanted. You respected theirs. And eventually, you created one of your own. That is the part they did not expect. Somewhere along the way, your silence stopped being only about them. It became about you. You began rebuilding. Slowly. Perhaps imperfectly. There may have been days when you felt strong and nights when everything returned. There may have been moments when a single memory erased weeks of progress. But you kept moving. You found pieces of yourself that had become too dependent on their presence. You remembered ambitions, interests, routines, and emotions that belonged to you before this connection became so important. You stopped waiting for every sign to be about them. You started asking what your own life was trying to teach you. And my child, that change carried an energy they can feel even from a distance. There is something powerful about a person who no longer needs an answer to survive. That does not mean you stopped caring. It means caring stopped controlling you. This is what they are sensing now. Perhaps they cannot name it. Perhaps they only know that when they think about you, something feels different. The old assumption that you would always be emotionally available no longer feels certain. And uncertainty has forced them to look inward. For the first time, they may be asking themselves what they actually lost rather than simply why you did not come running after them. And when they asked that question, memories answered. They remembered the person who believed in them when they were doubting themselves. They remembered your ability to make ordinary moments meaningful. They remembered your loyalty in moments when no one else knew what they were carrying. They remembered things you said that only make sense to them now. But one memory has been returning more than the others. A moment when you gave them a choice. Maybe you did not say those exact words, but emotionally you did. You gave them the freedom to decide what they wanted without threatening them with your pain. And they chose distance. You accepted that answer even though your heart wanted another. Now, from where they stand today, they are finally feeling the weight of what that meant. Because freedom reveals truth. You did not lock the door behind them. You simply stopped standing in the doorway asking them to reconsider. And that is why their emotions are becoming so difficult for them to ignore. They have begun to wonder whether your silence was actually your final expression of love. Not final in the sense that all feeling disappeared, but final in the sense that you refused to turn love into a negotiation. You allowed them to experience life without you. And life without you taught them things your presence never could. This realization is not comfortable. It is making them revisit their own behavior. They are remembering occasions when they assumed you would always understand. Times they gave less because they trusted that you would continue giving more. Moments they pulled away believing you would eventually close the distance for them. And now they see the pattern. You had been doing so much of the emotional returning. Maybe you were often the one repairing tension. Maybe you checked in first. Maybe you softened disagreements. Maybe you made excuses for things that hurt. Maybe you kept creating bridges while they kept deciding whether they wanted to cross them. Eventually, something in you became tired. Not tired of loving. Tired of proving. That distinction matters. And it is precisely what they are finally beginning to understand. You did not stop asking them back because you had stopped feeling. You stopped because one day you realized that someone who truly wanted to return should not need to be persuaded. That truth hit them deeply. Because now they know that if they ever come toward you again, the responsibility belongs to them. They cannot wait for you to reopen a door they were the one who walked through. They cannot depend on your old habit of fixing everything. And that is creating a new kind of fear inside them, not fear of you, but fear of what happens when a person waits too long to honor something genuine. They are wondering whether the version of you who once would have welcomed them instantly still exists. They are wondering whether healing has changed what you are willing to accept. They are wondering if your silence has become peace. And there is one question beneath all the others that they are almost afraid to answer. What if they never asked me to come back because they were waiting to see whether I would choose them without being asked? That question changed everything. Because it forced them to confront the difference between being wanted and being chosen. You wanted them. But you needed them to choose you. Freely. Clearly. Without emotional pressure. Without having to be reminded of what you shared. And now they are beginning to understand that perhaps the greatest mistake they made was expecting your love to do the work their courage should have done. Something inside them has softened since realizing this. The pride that once protected them is becoming harder to maintain. They can no longer tell themselves that your silence proves you never cared. They have too much evidence against that story now. Instead, another possibility is taking its place. Perhaps you cared so deeply that you refused to interfere with the lesson they needed to learn. And perhaps they are learning it now. My child, not every return is meant to happen, and not every separation is a promise of reunion. But every genuine connection can reveal truth, and this one has revealed something important about you. You are capable of loving without abandoning yourself. That is no small thing. You learn that closure does not always arrive through a final conversation. Sometimes closure begins when you stop chasing an answer that another person is not ready to give. Sometimes your life moves forward before your heart fully understands why. Sometimes the peace you prayed for comes disguised as the strength to leave a message unsent. And while you were becoming stronger, they were slowly becoming aware. The timing was different for both of you. You felt the loss first. They may be feeling the meaning later. That is why something seems to be unfolding now. They are not simply missing you. Missing someone can be temporary. What they are experiencing is more complicated. They are understanding you. And understanding someone after losing access to the version of them that loved you most openly can be deeply emotional. They are seeing that you were never playing a game. Your silence was not manipulation. Your distance was not punishment. You were simply unwilling to keep asking someone to recognize what should eventually become clear on its own. And now it has. But there is another layer to this, one they have not fully accepted yet. You see, understanding why you never asked them to come back has forced them to look at why they never came back on their own. That question is opening an entirely different wound. Because the answer is not as simple as pride. There was something else influencing them. Something they did not tell you. Something connected to the exact moment they decided to remain away even though part of them wanted to return. They have carried that hidden reason far longer than you realize. And recently, for the first time, they admitted it, perhaps only to themselves, perhaps to someone they trust. But the moment they finally spoke the truth about why they stayed away, your name came into the conversation. And what they confessed next was something even they had been trying not to face.